The night was silent. No music, no laughter, only the hum of the city and the echo of his own thoughts bouncing inside his head. He sat alone in his room, surrounded by the pieces of a life that once felt perfect. Trophies, old photos, certificates, reminders of the person he used to be. A person who smiled on the outside but was slowly falling apart inside. He stared at the mirror and asked himself the question no one wants to face. Who am I? The reflection stared back. Tired eyes, broken confidence, a heart heavy with failure. He realized something painful. He had become a stranger to himself. He was living for approval. He was chasing validation instead of purpose. He was pretending to be strong while quietly crumbling in silence. And that night, something inside him snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. He finally understood that in order to grow, he would have to let the old version of himself die. He whispered, "I must destroy myself to build myself." Those words burned in his chest like fire, because he knew it was not about self-hate, it was about self-evolution. It was about breaking every false belief that had chained him to mediocrity. He looked around his room. Every object carried a memory. The awards that no longer meant anything. The clothes he wore to impress people who never cared. The notes filled with dreams he never had the courage to chase. He gathered them one by one and placed them in a box. This was not destruction out of rage. This was rebirth. He was done living as the person the world wanted him to be. He was ready to become the person he was meant to be. He wrote a letter to himself. It said, "I forgive you for every time you doubted your worth, for every time you hid your pain behind a smile, for every dream you buried because fear told you it was impossible." Tears fell, but they felt clean, like rain washing away years of pretending. He stood up, walked to the window, and opened it wide. Cold air rushed in. For the first time in years, he could breathe freely. He understood that to build a new life, he must tear down the walls of the old one. He must destroy his comfort zone, his excuses, his dependence on validation. He must destroy the version of himself that settled for less when he deserved more. He took a deep breath and said, "The man I was is gone. The man I am becoming is unstoppable." Every morning after that night, he rose with discipline. He trained harder. He studied longer. He faced the mirror not with shame, but with hunger. The hunger to rebuild. There were days when his old habits tried to return. The doubt, the laziness, the fear of failure. But he met them with a new fire. The fire that came from breaking his own limits. He no longer blamed the world. He no longer waited for motivation. He created his own. He realized that growth is not a gentle process. It is violent. It is painful. It is the war between who you are and who you could be. And in that war, only one can survive. Every workout, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, he was killing his old self one decision at a time. The weak version, the doubting version. The version that cared too much about opinions and too little about purpose. He learned that real transformation begins when excuses end. When comfort dies, greatness begins to live. When fear burns, strength is born. He said to himself, "Destruction is not the end. It is the beginning." He stopped chasing pleasure and started chasing progress. He stopped seeking comfort and started seeking challenge, because challenge built him. Pain shaped him. Failure educated him. He understood that the version of himself that wanted an easy life had to die, so the version of himself that could handle greatness could finally be born. He whispered again, "I must destroy myself to build myself." And from that night onward, he lived by that code. Every day he asked, "What can I destroy today that no longer serves me?" Maybe it was a bad habit. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was self-doubt. Whatever it was, he let it go, piece by piece, day by day. And with every destruction came construction, with every loss came gain, with every fall came strength. He was no longer the boy who broke under pressure. He had become the man who thrived in it. And as he looked into the mirror once more, he did not see weakness. He did not see fear. He saw fire. He saw purpose. He saw the birth of a warrior. He smiled and whispered, "This is not the end of me. This is the beginning." Because to build yourself, you must first destroy everything that holds you back. And the moment you do that, you will realize the truth. The strongest version of you is waiting on the other side of destruction. He took a step forward into the new dawn. His past was behind him. His future was calling. He was no longer afraid. He was unbreakable. He was reborn. He had destroyed himself to build himself, and now he was finally alive. He stood in silence, watching the sunrise paint the sky with fire. The light touched his face like a quiet reminder that every ending carries a beginning. The shadows of yesterday were still there, stretching across the walls of his apartment, but they no longer held power over him. Ethan breathed deeply, feeling the crisp morning air fill his lungs. For years, he had hidden behind routine, excuses, and fear. He had believed that small comforts were enough, that staying safe meant he was winning. Now he knew the truth. Safety is the enemy of greatness. Growth demands discomfort. Transformation demands sacrifice. He walked to his desk and opened his notebook. The pages were blank, yet they felt alive, like a canvas waiting for the brush of a bold painter. He picked up his pen and began to write, not to impress anyone, not to prove himself to the world, but to prove to himself that he could create, destroy, and rebuild over and over again, until the masterpiece that was his life emerged. Each word he wrote felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a new self. The failures of the past became lessons. The regrets became fuel. The pain became power. He realized that destruction had a beauty of its own. It cleared the rubble, made space for vision, and forced him to face his own truth. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars hummed down the streets. Birds called across rooftops. People moved, rushing to their routines, unaware that someone in a small apartment was undergoing a personal revolution. Ethan smiled, knowing that most of life's battles are fought in silence. And those who endure in silence emerge unshakable, unrelenting, and unstoppable. He thought back to the darkest nights, the nights when fear whispered lies in his ear, when doubt clawed at his confidence, when the weight of expectations crushed him. He remembered thinking he could not go on. Yet he did. He kept moving, even when it hurt, even when every fiber of his being screamed for rest, even when the world seemed against him. That is when he understood the essence of the phrase he had whispered so many times: I must destroy myself to build myself. It was not about hatred or punishment. It was about honesty. It was about dismantling every lie he had told himself, every false belief that had kept him small, every fear that had chained him to mediocrity. Destruction, he realized, is the mother of creation. Pain is the midwife of strength. Failure is the sculptor of resilience. And so he continued, not hurriedly, not recklessly, but deliberately. Every morning he destroyed one layer of weakness, one habit of fear, one piece of the old self that no longer served him. Every evening he built a new layer of discipline, courage, and clarity. The process was slow, grueling, and sometimes terrifying. Yet he embraced it, because he knew that the man he wanted to become could only emerge from the ruins of who he had been. Weeks turned into months, months into years. Ethan's life was no longer the same. He had lost comfort, certainty, and the illusions of safety. But he had gained something far greater: purpose, power, and an unshakable belief in himself. He met challenges with a new energy. When obstacles appeared, he did not panic. When failures returned, he did not despair. He met them head-on, knowing that the process of breaking down and rebuilding had forged a resilience that no external force could shatter. People began to notice the change, not because he boasted, not because he shouted his achievements, but because the aura of transformation is impossible to hide. It radiates quietly from posture, gaze, and the calm authority of a person who has walked through fire and emerged reborn. And then one day, a young man approached him at a cafe. He was trembling, eyes wide with doubt and fear. I do not know what to do, the young man confessed. I feel lost. I feel broken. I feel like I am failing at everything. Ethan looked at him, and without speaking immediately, he remembered his own nights of despair. He thought of all the times he had wanted to quit. He thought of every letter thrown away, every failure endured, every dream almost abandoned. And he realized something vital. Pain shared becomes power multiplied. He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Listen carefully, Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. But to become the person you are meant to be, you must be willing to destroy the parts of yourself that are holding you back. You must be willing to face your fears, your weaknesses, your illusions, and then piece by piece rebuild. You will be broken, but in that brokenness, you will find the strength to create yourself anew. The young man's eyes widened. For the first time, he felt hope, because he realized that destruction was not the enemy. It was the key. Ethan walked away, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. He understood now that life's greatest lessons are not learned in comfort. They are learned in struggle, in loss, in the quiet nights when no one sees and no one applauds. And as he looked toward the horizon, he whispered once again, I must destroy myself to build myself. But this time, the words were not a warning, they were a promise. A promise to every challenge, every fear, every shadow that dared to stop him. He would rise, he would rebuild. He would create a version of himself so strong, so disciplined, so alive that nothing could break him again. And with that thought, Ethan walked forward, step by step, breath by breath. He was no longer afraid. He was no longer hesitant. He was alive, and the journey of true transformation had only just... Yet he never stopped the process. He knew that destruction and rebuilding were not one-time acts. They were a cycle, ongoing, relentless, necessary for continued growth. Every moment offered a chance to examine himself, to shed what no longer served him, and to construct a better version for the next day. Ethan also began mentoring others who were lost, broken, or afraid. He shared his story, but more importantly, he shared the process. He taught them that the path to greatness is not through comfort, not through ease, but through the deliberate dismantling of the self that clings to mediocrity. And he guided them to rebuild stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever before. Years later, when Ethan looked back, he saw a timeline of destruction and creation. Every failure, every heartbreak, every doubt, every late night of effort. It was all a necessary part of the journey. He realized that life's purpose was not to avoid destruction, but to face it, endure it, and use it as fuel for self-construction. He whispered to himself one last time before the sun fully rose, I have destroyed what I needed to destroy. I have built what I needed to build. And yet the work is never done. For every new day brings new opportunities, new challenges, and new parts of myself to rebuild. Ethan stepped out into the light. He was no longer the man who feared failure. He was no longer the man who hid behind excuses. He was alive, present, unshakable, and unrelenting. Because he had learned the ultimate truth, the strongest, most powerful version of yourself is never found in comfort. It is forged in fire. It is built from ruins. It rises from the ashes of your own destruction. And as Ethan walked forward, he carried that truth in his chest in every step and in every heartbeat. To build yourself, you must first be willing to destroy who you are, and in that destruction, a new life, a new purpose, and a new power are born. If you want, I can now create the full YouTube video package for this speech, including title under 30 words, description 16 30 timestamps, hashtags, and 500 character SEO keywords. So it is fully optimized for virality. Do you want me to do that next? Ethan stood on the edge of a quiet hill as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The wind brushed against his face, carrying the scent of earth and possibility. He looked back at the path he had traveled, the nights of doubt, the battles with fear, the countless moments he had destroyed the parts of himself that no longer served him. Each scar, each failure, each broken piece had led him here. And now he understood something profound. Destruction had not been the enemy. It had been the teacher. It had been the fire that forged strength, clarity, and courage. He took a deep breath and whispered to the horizon, I am not who I was. I am becoming who I am meant to be. The sky darkened, stars beginning to pierce the twilight. Ethan felt a calm settle within him, a quiet certainty that the work of rebuilding was never truly finished. Every day would bring new challenges, new fears, new old habits to destroy, and new strengths to build. But he was ready. With one last glance at the fading light, he stepped forward into the unknown. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with purpose, with fire, and with the unshakable knowledge that the greatest version of himself was waiting on the other side of destruction. And in that moment, Ethan realized the ultimate truth. To build yourself, you must first destroy what is holding you back. And from those ashes, your true power will rise. He walked on, alive, unstoppable, and reborn.